My Adventures with Superman was back this week for a brand new episode entitled You'll Believe a Man Can Lie, a very fun take on the classic Richard Donner Superman movie tagline of You'll Believe a Man Can Fly. I'm Gabe Jewell, and this is the video series where I give my thoughts and feelings on the episode that was, while also shouting out any comic book Easter eggs or references I can find. So with that out of the way, let's dig into it, shall we? So then, picking up from where more or less last week's episode left off, Lois had finally managed to riddle out that Clark Kent and Superman were the same person. Sadly for her, this revelation didn't exactly bring her much joy. In fact, quite the opposite. She's despondent. She hasn't even bothered to confront Clark about any of this yet. A fact of which will only make much more sense as the episode goes on, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, the other big plot this week actually involves Jimmy, who was left high and dry by his friends after Ivo's party in the last episode, but he hopes an upcoming camping trip with his friends will turn things around. He really needs it to. Jimmy really needs it too, as he's currently fighting an uphill battle as his Flamebird conspiracy videos are getting dragged online by another more popular streamer who is getting a ton of hits just making fun of Jimmy and his videos. This is a truly unique type of hell to be in, and as someone who works professionally online, I see it happen all the time. Man, this show is too real, I tell ya. Also, a fun fact about Jimmy's videos, he makes one talking about Atlantis and he uses the term Sub Diego, a very clear reference to one of the more famous Aquaman stories that was also called Sub Diego. I mentioned this in the first episode, but it bears repeating. I guess the joke with Jimmy is going to be at least half of the crazy conspiracy things he says will ultimately end up being true because this is the DC universe and crazy shit happens all the time. Jimmy doesn't even get the opportunity to talk to Clark and Lois face to face, as he ends up getting forced to accompany Steve Lombard on what he thinks is an important assignment for Perry and the paper, but more on this one in a minute. Once again, this week's episode also seeks to address the hanging threat that is those tech weapons that Livewire allowed to get out on the street. Superman has been trying his hardest to clean up the mess, but in this episode we learn there's another superpowered individual going out there and dealing with anyone even remotely connected to tech weapons and making them disappear. Clark actually wants him and Lois to follow up on the tech weapon story, as it would mean both doing his Superman work and paperwork at the same time, and he's so dedicated to this mission he can't even see that Lois is desperately trying to get him to cop to being Superman. This leads to maybe the funniest joke of the whole episode. Basically, now that Lois knows Clark is Superman, it's so painfully obvious that every time he runs off, he's doing it so that he can save the day, and why did she not notice it before? Also, the only excuses that Clark can seem to come up for to explain his Superman-related absence are all bagel-themed. With the help of the planet's old police scanner, though, Lois figures if she can't get Clark to open up, she's going to just spend her day tracking down Superman until he's willing to talk, even if that means needing to handcuff herself to Superman before another big fight breaks out with more tech weapon-wielding goons. To Lois's credit, she does manage to kick one of those thugs pretty damn hard, showing that she's even more capable than she thought she was. Breaking more of this stolen tech, too, also gives Clark another one of those weird visions. This time to a field on fire and a young man who will look all too familiar to people who are actively paying attention. As it turns out, these baddies were only hoping to steal a car so they could flee Metropolis, fearing that Superman would make them disappear like all the others. Obviously, Superman has no idea what they're talking about, and the plot only begins to thicken even more. Elsewhere, poor Jimmy, who really is just having the worst day ever, finds out it's Steve Lombard who's actually the guy behind those videos dragging Flamebird online, because of course he would be. This is pretty awkward on its own, but it only gets worse when it's made clear that Lombard actually likes Jimmy, and in his own twisted way he felt like he was helping Jimmy, a fellow outsider amongst the intern trio, much like how Steve always felt like he was the odd man out of the Scoop Troop when they all started. I do gotta appreciate that they're giving us a more complex take on Steve Lombard, because I feel in a much weaker show it would have been too easy just to make him a cut and dry jock bully, but here he's got, you know, stuff going on. Now, it turns out that Lady Crook is actually able to give Superman the slip thanks to her new heat wave tech, only she ends up getting hunted down by that mystery man from before anyway. Obviously, heat wave has got to be a reference to the famous fire-wielding Flash foe of the same name. No word if this lady is also supposed to be this world's answer to Mick Rory, as we never actually get her name, but My Adventures with Superman has already done so much to reinvent and remix and remaster, I wouldn't be surprised if she was. But who exactly is hunting down these tech weapon-wielding goons? Well, it turns out to be none other than Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke, and his mysterious cabal of military types, still only known so far in the show as the quote-unquote good guys. Deathstroke has actually undergone a pretty sizable redesign here from his comic book counterpart. Normally he gets his powers from decades worth of military military experience and a cocktail of catch-all super soldier serum. Here though, much like all the other villains, his powers are tech-based, but not just any tech. Apparently his suit is so great because he's been upgrading it with stuff they've taken off the other villains Superman has been fighting. It's certainly not my favorite Deathstroke suit, but it does make sense for the show, and it's got some cool flashy flourishes like the rocket boots that he uses to kick, or the two swords that actually become guns when he wants them to. It's all very, very anime. In fact, he even gets a little Saiyan Scouter for good measure. We also see the return of Amanda Waller this episode, who even gets the chance to speak, and holy crap, that's Deborah Wilson doing her voice. Good for her. Glad that casting is being weirdly consistent across multiple DC projects right now. No joke, growing up watching Mad TV, I had a massive crush on Deborah Wilson, so it's so cool to hear her in this show. Waller is also sure to drop more cryptic references to Zero Day and Nemesis Omega, whatever those mean. And then of course I have to bring up the mysterious general who Superman recognizes from his visions. The credits only refer to this guy as the General, but I think it's pretty safe to say that this dude must be Lois's dad, General Sam Lane. Superman also gets the opportunity to show off how far he's come as a fighter in a short amount of time by taking on two of those giant killer robots from the first episode and defeating them with relative ease, well before it took him everything to try and beat them. In the end, the real battle isn't even with Deathstroke himself, but instead it's Superman needing to save a bus full of kids who are on their way to Bloodhaven, home of Nightwing, I might add, before a crumbling bridge can send them all to their deaths. It's actually the General who calls off Slade and lets Superman do his good work, showing that this dude isn't nearly as cold or heartless as Deathstroke or even Waller, who he calls Mandy, by the way. Oh, you are familiar, sir. The day is saved, but for Superman, his problems are just beginning, as now he finally has to have that long overdue reckoning with Lois. Last week, we learned just how important the concept of the truth was to her, as Lois grew up with a dad who often lied by omission and tried to obfuscate the truth from her, up to and including her mother's own illness. Obviously, Clark didn't mean to hurt her, he was just trying to protect his own privacy at a time when he's also trying to figure stuff out and feeling very vulnerable, but still, he ended up hurting Lois all the same, much like her dad did, and Lois really forces Superman's hand by throwing herself off a building, knowing full well that he'll be forced to save her, and in doing so fess up to his double life. It's actually a really affecting emotional gut punch of an ending, made even more dire when we see that a dejected Jimmy, tired of his friends ignoring him all day long, went on that camping trip by himself, only to be grabbed by a giant gorilla as the episode ends. In fact, in another nice little touch, Jimmy usually is seen walking around in the credits. Yeah, in this he's not. And so that's You Will Believe a Man Can Lie, and I gotta say, my adventures with Superman ups its game once again by delivering an episode that wasn't just funny and fancy-free, but also not afraid to dip its toes into some more serious and dramatic subject matter as well. I was worried they might try and throw Lois off the scent and let Clark keep his double life a little bit longer, but this show once again throws down the gauntlet and says that this is going to be the new normal moving forward. Lois learns Clark's secret early on, and that's just something they have to work with, both as friends, as co-workers, and assumedly as lovers too. Similarly, the large military conspiracy subplot with what is Zero Day, why did it happen before, why is the General seemingly at the center of all of this, has me pretty interested and invested, mainly because it looks like the show is going to be doing its own thing here and not just adapting something I know from the comics. Overall, another really solid entry in what is becoming a consistently solid show. And so then everyone, that'll just about do it for me for another video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, be sure to follow me here on YouTube and on Twitter so you always know when I got a new Superman video coming down the pipeline. And hey, I'm also reviewing Harley Quinn from Max as well too, so check that out.